Hey guys, what's happening? So for this one, we're getting caught up with Absolute Wonder Woman as part of the absolute bangers that DC's putting out right now. So with that said, I got links in the description for the full playlist for anyone who needs to get caught up. And if you're enjoying these videos, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so coming back, we pick up right where we left off, just off of the coast of Gateway City in California, with Diana confronting Harbinger Prime. And from the moment that all of this popped off, it's been covered live by the news. And there was even a moment in the beginning where the news anchor, Alan Fox, told his cameraman that he had to take a look first, and that dude called him an absolute coward, which is really funny considering the title of this story, or even if you look at it in relation to absolute power and everything that got us here. But one of the most interesting takeaways from this is how this world, they're not used to this. Because the news anchor goes on to say, Alan Fox, reporting for The Gate. If you're just tuning in, sit down first, as these are historic and frankly terrifying images. At present, a strange superpowered woman is fighting massive creatures, the likes of which we've only seen in science fiction, on our beach. The shores of Gateway City will never be the same. Maybe nowhere will be the same. And it almost puts me in the headspace of watching a movie like Cloverfield or something, where this mysterious creature shows up and everyone goes crazy, only to have this Wonder Woman step out, and then it's like, oh, that's what we doing. And straight out of the gate, Diana takes the fight to Harbinger Prime using her lasso, Nemesis. And at first she just gives this thing a taste as a bit of a warning shot before telling it to leave, but Harbinger Prime doesn't let up, and instead it sends all of its Harbingers in to attack Diana. So she deflects this horde of Harbingers by using her magic, just before she goes back at Harbinger Prime with her lasso, Nemesis. And this is where we learn more about her lasso, its history and what it's capable of doing, because it's here where she says, "Hear me, Harbinger Prime, for I bring to you Nemesis, a weapon forged in the fires of hell, fashioned by my mother, the sorceress Circe, made from the remains of the last basilisk, infused with the blood of Prometheus, blessed by Demeter, goddess of the harvest, mother of us all. And for you, Harbinger Prime, Nemesis will be a particular hell, for she binds and burns in proportion to your sins, and your soul shines bright with the blood of the innocent." And that right there is one of the crazy things about Absolute Wonder Woman's lasso, because on one hand, in a similar way to Ghost Rider's penance stare, which would cause the recipient to feel the pain they've inflicted on others, which is what happens here, but basically with how she describes it, Nemesis can yield different results for different individuals. But in the here and now, when she places Nemesis on Harbinger Prime, it puts this dude in pain. So she tells him, "The burn you feel, Harbinger, know that it is the result of the pain you have brought on others. All you are feeling, you have earned," which has Harbinger Prime just begging to be released. So she tells him, "You shall have your freedom on one condition only. You will leave this place and not return, and you will pass this message to whatever monster summoned you to do its bidding. This world is now protected by Diana of the Wild Isle itself, Princess of Hell, the last Amazon, and all the resources at her command. Tremble and hide for another millennium, or two, if you are wise." So Harbinger Prime accepts, and him and all his Harbingers retreat into this inverted pyramid kind of thing just before it goes down into the ocean. And mind you, like we saw before, this whole thing is being televised. So as Alan Fox is reporting, he's just like, "That thing's going in the ocean? Does it live there?" He's letting all the intrusive thoughts out because he's terrified, and they gotta remind him that he's still on air. But with things calming down for a moment, it's here where Steve Trevor shows up, just before we get another flashback that shows us how they met. Which on one hand, it's a lot like what we've seen before, with Diana finding Trevor washing up on the shore, but given the adjustments that are made for this Absolute Wonder Woman story, this allows for the moment to feel fresh in a lot of ways. Because for one, with Diana being raised on the Wild Isle in Hell, this is where she finds Trevor. And when she first speaks to him, it's in Greek, and he responds saying, "Please tell them I'm sorry," but it's not until Diana does a translation spell where she's like, "Okay, try again, I can understand you now." And she's not able to get much out of him before he's snatched away by a Hydra. But Diana doesn't waste any time, because she just goes in after Steve and takes him back. And I like how when this happens, it shows us a different side of Diana at the time, because when she takes him back to her home so her and Circe can look after him, she explains to Circe what happened with how he just washed up on the shore and how the Hydra tried to snatch him up, so she took him back. And though this leads to Circe telling Diana that she can't just be out here fighting the Hydra casually, and how she hopes that the Hydra's memory is short so they won't have any problems later, and Diana's just like, if there is a problem, she'll kill it, because he does not belong to the Hydra. And it's like, on one hand, this is really different from what we've seen as far as Diana's interactions with the other creatures here over the years, where she's usually loving, caring, and forgiving. But the first moment she laid eyes on Trevor, she's ready to kill to protect him. And it comes off as possessive the way that she tells Cersei he does not belong to the Hydra. And Cersei's like, well, who does he belong to? You? And even though Diana tells her, of course not, he belongs to himself, but I found him and so I'm responsible for his life, Cersei's just like, I'm not sure that's entirely true. And I just like how it's not like Diana's lying about any of this, but with meeting Trevor, she's experiencing things that she hasn't felt before. And because of that, there's a lot of sidestepping with the way that she talks to Cersei, only for Cersei to see right through it. And again, I don't see this as a bad thing at all, because it's a moment in time that shows growth, and it's foreshadowing how fierce of a protector Diana would become. And after Steve gets some rest, Diana goes to talk to him. And now he's like, well, before on the beach, I thought you spoke Greek. And Diana tells him, I did. And Steve's like, but we're not in Greece. And Diana's like, I wish. And eventually this has Steve like, okay, well, where are we? So at first, Diana does more of the sidestepping, because she's like, we're in my home. I live here with my mother, Cersei. And Steve's just like, yeah, but where? So she's just like, well, this is going to be hard. You're in the underworld. And it takes a second for it to process for Steve before he's like, wait, you mean like hell? And he's like, I'm dead? And this dude quite literally has a breakdown. And I mean, Diana and Cersei try to tell him that he's not exactly dead, but just based off the pure shock of finding out where he's at right now, this dude isn't good for any kind of conversation. So they give him some space and give him a minute to pull himself together. So as Steve is off over to the side here trying to hold on to what sanity he has left, Diana asks Cersei why does she think he's here? And Cersei just tells her that she doesn't know. And Diana goes on to say, do you think it's a test or a trap or? And Cersei's like, or what? And Diana's like, or a gift. And the look that Cersei gives her, she looking like, girl. Because for Diana, this is a memory of how she met Trevor. But on the other hand, for Cersei, this is a memory of her seeing Diana grow into a woman. And Cersei is catching every single nuance. But not long after this, when Steve eventually pulls himself together, he apologizes for his behavior and he thanks the two of them for their help. And he goes on to ask Diana to take him to where she found him, so he can investigate the area. And so of course Diana, she likes the sound of this, because it's kind of like a first date in a lot of ways. Because when they head back to the spot where she found him, and Trevor's skipping stones and they're having a talk, it's not at all like a stroll through paradise, but in a lot of ways you can see how this moment was special to them. And what I like about this the most is how we get this moment here where Diana tells Steve that he shouldn't be throwing stones, because he's basically throwing them in the same place where the Hydra took him. But then she points out here how she sees one of the tentacles of the Hydra going under way in the distance. And Steve is squinting his eyes like, I don't see it. So Diana's like, I apologize. I forget my vision is quite good. And Steve is just like, I got good vision too. I'm a pilot. And it's just kind of like, yeah, no, your vision and hers are not the same. And this is how the flashback serves as a way of not only telling us more about Diana's past and her story, but it also serves as a way of showing Steve's experience, with him noticing these remarkable things about Diana, with him telling her how a pilot must have exceptional eyes, while noticing that her eyes are something else, something beyond that. And it turns into a thing where he's both admiring her capability and her beauty, which both go above and beyond anything that's common in Steve's world. And this leads to Steve also mentioning that she's very tall, which has Diana like, we're similar height, but Steve's got to more or less explain it to her here, because on his world he's considered to be tall, and there's almost no women as tall as Diana. And when she asks him, does this matter? Steve's like, no, actually it doesn't matter at all. Like, that ain't no problem, that ain't no problem. So Diana's just like, then let's talk of something else. Tell me of your world, other than how tall people are. And right here, Steve's not ready to talk about his world just yet, because he still doesn't think that he's ever going to get back. So he tells her like, hey, I don't want to brag, but I didn't think hell was where I was headed. So Diana asks him here, does anyone? And that right there is a real question, because nobody, and I mean some people might, but most people don't think like, oh, one day I'm gonna end up in hell, can't wait. Because in most cases, people will have some kind of justification in their mind that'll support the notions of whether they believe they're a good person, and when they leave this world, they'll go to a better place because they did good things. And aside from that, you have people of different faith and religions and so on. But basically, Steve is struggling with understanding the reason why he ended up here. And she ends up telling him, here's what I think. Not everyone here belongs here. It's just sometimes where we've ended up. And if you think about it, that could apply to being in just about any unfavorable situation. And it ended up helping Steve at the time. And now with us coming back to the present day in Gateway City, we learned that it's been some time since the two have seen each other. And throughout this story, we'll get caught up on more of the events that took place in between through more flashbacks. But in the here and now, Steve's come out to see Diana because he's been asked to take her to meet Commander Cole. And when she meets the commander, this dude is barking at her like she couldn't just kick this dude out of this plane of existence if she wanted to. And as we're thrown into this, the commander is yelling at her about how she's endangering a massive number of civilians without military coordination or approval, of being in league, quote unquote, with the harbinger, as if she'd staged this whole thing, since she showed up as soon as it arrived and she was the only person who could stop it. So he basically tells her to explain all this to him, but instead Diana just tells him here, "I understand your position, Commander. I am an outsider and an element you cannot control, and that frustrates you, but this is not my problem. My problem is that monsters are coming, and I am only one woman, but I will coordinate with you to the best of my ability so that we may save more lives together. This world is not prepared for what is coming for it, and you will need my help, but please understand that any effort to fashion me into yet another arm of your military-industrial complex will simply not be tolerated." And after that, she basically dismisses the guy, and she asks the others how the evacuation is proceeding, because they're not in the clear just yet. And when she tells them the creature she defeated was the harbinger, that's when they realize that it was quite literally that, a messenger for something else, and definitely something worse. So they ask Diana if she knows what it will be or when it will arrive. So she tells them no, there are many things it could be, but as for when it's coming, she tells them that's likely within the hour. And right there, Commander Cole's like, within the hour? So he orders for the evacuation to be finished in 40 minutes, only to then turn to Diana, and shortly after that Steve, and basically tell her to fall in line, while throwing around the threat of a court-martial. And that's when Diana steps in real close, and she's like, "Are you finished?" And the commander's like, "Yes." And she tells him, "Here's the problem, Commander. I think we both know you need me quite badly, given what just happened, but I don't need you at all. So perhaps rethink how you would like to approach this conversation, and let's try again when you've calmed down. Hopefully that'll be before any innocent people have lost their lives. I'll be outside feeding my horse." And it's like a really tense moment before she leaves. Like everyone in the room was eyes wide, holding their breath the whole time. And as she goes through the door, one of the soldiers is like, "What do you feed a dead horse?" And Diana's just like, "Magic." And it's also in this quick moment here where Steve goes outside to talk to Diana, where we find out that her Pegasus is actually the Pegasus, the great mythological winged horse, born of Medusa's blood and slain by Zeus. Which right there just reminds me of one of the reasons why I'm digging Absolute Wonder Woman so much, because there's so much about her story that deals with the things and the people that have been discarded, whether it was Circe who was sent to hell, as well as the young Diana, or the great Pegasus who was slain and basically written off as history. This story takes all of these characters who have been sent to the lowest place, and it tells a story of how they've all either risen or given a contribution that was bigger than themselves. And it's a really powerful message, because in any of these instances, and you can even throw Trevor in there because we saw him go to hell as well, but in all these instances, Diana has made an impact on everyone, starting with Circe, who fell in love with the child when she raised her, then resurrecting the Pegasus, and on to Diana saving Steve. And any of these things could have had either grim outcome or just not made their way back from hell, but because of Diana, they all have been impacted in a positive way. But right here, just after Diana tells Steve that this is the actual Pegasus that was slain by Zeus, and it has Steve like, "Oh, so that's why he's just, bones." So Diana tells him he's far more than just, bones, but yes, he's bones because he was slain. And when Steve asks her, so how is he alive? She tells him magic and sacrifice, just like you. Which right there gives us a hint to how Trevor came back, and we don't get into those details just yet, but we'll learn more about that in a little bit. And next, when Steve apologizes for what happened inside, he asks Diana what will she do if they don't let her help. And she tells him here, "I'd like to see them try. They will come around, Steve. I'm sorry to say, there are many things coming that will force them to. They need my help, and there will be others too." Which right there has Steve like, "Others?" So she tells him, "Heroes." Which right there lets us know that Diana already knows that she'll be joined by other heroes down the line. But right in the middle of this, Pegasus gets startled when he hears the uncomfortable sound of what's to come. And right after Pegasus hears it, Diana hears it, and then it hits Trevor and everyone else. And when Steve asks Diana what is it that's making that sound, she tells him it will pass. It's what comes next. We have to fear, for now I have seen the face of the tetracide, and none who see it shall survive. And she goes on to describe this thing as death personified. And even now, all of this is being broadcasted throughout Gateway City. And it's here where we see a girl by the name of Barbara Minerva, who we see at the Gateway Natural History Museum, and we'll learn more about her in a little bit. But right now, with her watching this on the news, she sees Diana, and for a moment she's just like Wonder Woman, just before she takes off. And back over with Diana, when she returns to the soldiers, it's here where we start to realize how serious this is. Because at first she lets them know that she used some magic to slow it down and buy time, but she goes on to tell them here that tetracide is very resistant to magic. My mother would have been more effective, but alas, we have only me. Before you leave, and you should all leave immediately, it's important I tell you how the tetracide kills, so you may have any hope of fighting it after it has killed me. And one of the soldiers is just like, killed you? Because the way they see it, if this thing kills her, there's no hope for the rest of them. So Diana goes on to explain to them what this thing is, to give them a fighting chance. So she tells them, tetracide, it means quite literally, the four killer. It kills in 4 ways: death of fear, death of mind, death of body, death of soul. So one of the soldiers is like, death of fear? That don't sound so bad. But Diana tells them, and that's where you would be wrong, soldier. That is our greatest danger, given that it is immersed in a heavily populated area. Because what the tetracide means by death of fear is that you are no longer capable of feeling fear when you see it, and you are instead drawn to it. Very soon the tetracide will begin to emanate a sound. It will be loud and sharp. It will travel for miles, and when people hear that sound, they will be drawn to it like bees to honey. They will do anything to be with the sound. They will walk right into the tetracide's jaws, where one dies in agony, a death of mind, body, and soul. And she basically tells them anyone who's killed in the tetracide's maw, or is basically killed before reaching it, they're gonna be the lucky ones. Cause she goes on to tell them touching the tetracide will begin to destroy your mind, making you incapable of resisting. Death of the body quickly follows, as it ingests you. And death of the soul, well, that explains itself. And after that, as she leaves to fight the tetracide, Steve tries to stop Diana to have a word, only for her to continue to leave while telling him to do everything he can to evacuate the people, because she won't be able to help them once that sound begins. And as Diana goes to confront the tetracide, she makes sure to give the instructions to Pegasus for him to stay at a distance and only use Hellfire as an attack, if he can. Because like Diana said before, if this thing touches you, it's basically over. And so at first, Diana gives it an offer much like she did for the Harbinger Prime, with her telling it to either leave or die, but this thing doesn't go for that, not even for a second. So she ends up tying her lasso, Nemesis, to her sword and sinking it into the tetracide as she wraps it around, which is followed by Pegasus breathing fire when he can. But this plan just quickly falls apart when the tetracide removes Diana's sword, so she pulls an axe out of her magic bag so she can continue to fight. But this only leads to the tetracide grabbing her right arm. And it's like now, according to Diana's description, this is the part that leads to death of the mind, death of the body, and death of the soul. But it's here where we're quickly taken into another flashback that picks up moments after where the last one had left off, with Diana and Steve back in hell, fighting the Hydra that had tried to snatch Steve up. And we find out here that it was just a baby Hydra, but even still, a Hydra is a Hydra, you know? But with going back to this moment, it takes us to a conversation that took place between Diana and Steve shortly after, where he pointed out that it's amazing how everything in hell is either a trap or pain or a struggle, and yet Diana and Cersei have managed to make a home of it. And he even says that it's like their own paradise. And this leads to Diana telling him that love is transformative, always. And that just has Trevor like, well, yeah, the surface could use a lot of that, referring to the love. So from there, Diana asks Steve to tell her more about the surface, about his home. And that led him going on talking about Coast City, and how when the light hits the Pacific at sunset, it reminds him of his mother's laugh, which really showed Diana how much Steve missed it. And this leads to us finding out that later, Diana found a spell that could send Steve home. So she sent Steve to get some wood off the front porch so she could tell Cersei in private. But after seeing the spell that Diana selected, Cersei tells Diana that she doesn't fully understand what the spell is asking for, with it mentioning a sacrifice. And right now, Diana totally believes that she understands it and that she knows what this means. But before they can talk about it further, Steve comes back in, so Cersei and Diana put the conversation aside for a moment. But later on, Cersei wakes up to find Diana sitting in front of the bright red fire. So of course, Cersei's like, what are you doing up at this hour? And Diana tells her, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And when Cersei asks her about what, Diana tells her about what I am to be. If I am a great warrior, and will someday be an even greater one, a savior of humanity as you say, then I cannot fail my first mission for humanity. Because now, after thinking about this for hours, Diana believes that returning Trevor to his home is her mission. And she even tells Cersei here that he wasn't a gift, he was a test. And it's crazy when you think about it, because for Diana on this journey to greatness, it all comes down to how she handles this. And it's a lot like David and Goliath, because before he defeated a giant, he first had to fight a lion and a bear. So the way Diana handles this test early on, this is going to determine how she defeats her giant, or the tetracide later on. even though she doesn't know that specifically right now. She's at least come to understand at this point how important this test is, because it also falls in line perfectly with what she's said to be as far as a savior to humanity. And that's why she says here to return to them one of their greatest heroes. One good man is all it takes to save the world. This is something she has to do no matter the price. That's when we find out here that Diana's come to understand what the spell was asking for, because the price that need to be paid in order to return Steve home is the dominant arm of a great warrior. And that's when Cersei sees this and she starts freaking out. But Cersei already knew. She was just hoping somehow that it wouldn't have come to this. And understandably so, because Diana's like a daughter to her. And so following this, we see Cersei help Diana with the spell to send Trevor back. And it really just goes to show how extraordinary Diana is with her capacity for love, her capacity for pain, her capacity for sacrifice, her capacity for honor. And it's like, for Cersei, she knew these things about Diana, but at the time, to see it actually come to fruition, this blew Cersei away because it exceeded anything she could have imagined. And this all comes together when we go back to the present day, where Diana has her arm grabbed by the tetracide. And this is a really huge moment because when we come back, Diana just says some magic words and this arm she has, it disappears. Because this was just a magic arm that she had. She lost her real arm long ago, like we saw. But this just goes to show, had Diana not done what she needed to do to send Trevor back, had she failed that first test, then she would have died here. And for me, I just love how well this comes together. And I'm sure somebody's gonna be like, oh, well, she could have just cut off her arm here and got away. But there's two reasons why that wouldn't work. Because for one, if she didn't have it in her then, she wouldn't suddenly have it in her now. But also there's more that we have to learn about this arm that we'll talk about in a little bit. But first, we follow Diana as she heads back to Trevor and the other soldiers, where at first some of these soldiers are like, oh my god, that thing took your arm. Like, it's not a good sign. But Diana just tells this guy that she's fine. And she keeps it short because she just tells him here, I lost my arm long ago. In its place is a magic arm my mother and I made. I can get it back, but it will take complicated magic. So in the meantime, she reaches into her bottomless magic bag and she pulls out a temporary arm that looks like something out of a Star Wars movie. And it basically serves its purpose for the time being, but right away this reminds Steve of what Diana gave just to bring him back. But she has no regrets for what she did, because she understands she was just doing what needed to be done. And because there's not really any time for everyone to just be standing around here, Diana more or less tells these soldiers for their own sake they have to move faster. And of course, Steve, he doesn't just want to leave Diana in a moment like this, and she knows that he doesn't because it's part of the reason why he was worthy of being saved to begin with. But she tells him again here that he's got to leave, because if he were to die here, then that would just defeat the whole point of saving him. And after this, as Diana's leaving, it's here where we see her run into Barbara Minerva, the girl we saw before at the Natural History Museum, who, based on her name, may likely become Cheetah at some point. And at first, Diana's reaction is like, miss, you shouldn't be here. And at this point, really, it's too late for her or anyone else to run away. So she tells her to go inside the bar she just walked out of, called the Kraken, and talk to Steve Trevor and tell him Diana asked you to get him to safety. And as Diana walks away, the girl says, Wonder Woman. And she goes on to explain that that's what the Amazons would call their champion, the absolute best of them, which catches Diana's attention. So she asks her, like, you know of the Amazons? So Barbara tells her that she wrote her dissertation on the myth of the Amazons, and that it's her primary field of study. And so of course that has Diana like, myth. But this conversation is cut short given the whole tetracide situation. So Diana tells her that they'll talk more about this later. So Barbara quickly tells Diana her name and Diana tells her hers, because this is something Diana wants to look into further at a later time. And as Diana leaves, Barbara yells, I'm in the book. And Diana admits she doesn't know what that means, but later on she'll make sure and find out. And when Diana leaves, it's here when we start to see her new plan come together. Because at first she's like, I'm gonna die here. This thing's gonna kill me, and no one else is gonna be able to fight for these people, because once the sound begins, they're all gonna get drawn in. But then it's this moment of facing her fear and saying it out loud that gives her an idea, which then leads to her pulling out this orb from her pouch and making her way to Alan Fox, the news reporter we saw earlier. And this takes us to a rooftop where we see Diana with Alan Fox and his cameraman as she's preparing a spell on the ground, because Diana needs their help to send a message to the people of Gateway City, where part of it has to do with this spell. But she tells them like, hey, don't film this part, because people aren't gonna understand it and it's gonna freak them out. And shortly after, this leads to Diana going on air and saying, hello Gateway City, my name is Diana and I'm afraid I need your help to save your city. There's a terrible monster on your beach called the tetracide, and I've been trying to fight it, but it's very powerful. It is beyond me. The military is trying to evacuate you, but there's simply not enough time. Soon the tetracide will emit a sound that will compel you to sacrifice yourselves. This will be difficult to hear, to understand, but to save you from this fate, I'm going to briefly make you all deaf. The entire city. Many of you do not believe me, but I assure you, you are about to become believers. And she goes on to tell the people that she needs their help to tell others who aren't able to hear or see this message, because even though Diana thought she'd come here to save the city all on her own, this part involves the people of the city saving each other. So she encourages them to stay strong and help one another get through this, and at the very end she tells them, Wonder Woman believes in you. And as it turns out, the spell that we saw Diana drawing on the ground just moments ago, or better yet on this rooftop, it's an amplification spell to widen the spell that'll make everyone deaf 1,000-fold. So when she does the spell, it's able to cover the entirety of Gateway City, to keep everyone from hearing the sound of the tetracide and basically go marching to their death. And in addition to this, Diana told the news anchor Alan Fox to loop her message on the television, so for anyone who catches it at any point, they can pick up everything she said, which ends up taking us over to two sisters who are watching the message. So one of them basically just writes down on a note to tell the other that she's gonna go out and help. But on her way out of their shop, she's met by both Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman. And this is where we find out that the woman here, her name is Etta Candy, and the other woman is her sister Gia. And so usually Etta's known as one of Wonder Woman's close friends in the normal world aside from Steve Trevor. And I think in the Absolute universe, we're gonna see a similar thing, albeit with its own twist on the character. But in the here and now with Diana and Steve showing up, Etta's sister, Gia, she starts tripping out because she saw the message on the television. So she's like, oh no, I could hear. So this must mean the death sounds are gonna get me. But Diana tells her not to worry because she's done a protective spell around the building so they can communicate safely. So Steve goes on to introduce Diana to the two of them, because prior to this, he's already told them the story of how he returned from hell. So aside from them seeing the video loop from the news broadcast, now it's like they're putting that together with Steve telling them that this is the Diana I was talking about. And when he goes on to tell them why they're here, he lets them know that Diana asked him if he knew of any witches. And right away, everyone here just looks at Gia. But we're not really told if she's a witch in a traditional sense or anything like that. But instead, there's more so an emphasis on Jean having the ingredients that Diana needs, so she can do a spell and get her magic arm back. Because this prosthetic arm, it's powerful and all, but it pales in comparison to the arm that Diana and her mother made. And I like how when we get to this point, Diana mentions how when she did the spell to deafen the whole city, she ended up using the last of something she had, and she's saying this while pulling different things out of her bottomless bag. And I like how this shows us a couple things here, cause for one, this lets us know that Diana's bag just isn't some magical bottomless pit or plot device that's set up in a way where she can just reach in and have everything she needs. But also with her coming here and getting help and getting these different supplies, Diana mentions that a lot of these ingredients that were hard for her and her mother to come by, they're all just so common here. Which makes sense because you'd imagine on the Wild Isle in hell, at least from how we've seen it depicted in the series, that a lot of this stuff would be hard to come by, like vervain and althea root, any of these ingredients really. And so when Diana gets the ingredients that she needs, she asks them if they have somewhere that's not this lovely shop, because for the next part there's going to be a whole lot of blood. It's going to get messy. So they end up letting her use what looks like a storage closet. And we find out here to do this spell, Steve, Etta, and Gia, they all contribute by giving Diana some of their blood. And as we start to see this spell go underway, with Diana covered in blood, as she calls on the goddess Hecate as the daughter of her beloved Circe, asking that the goddess lend her great power once again. And as this happens, we're taken into another flashback with Circe, back in hell on the Wild Isle. And this fills in more as far as what Circe mentioned before, when she talked about the visions she had of what Diana would become, and how the fulfillment of those things happening exceeded Circe's expectations. And these visions were so intense that they just had Circe blowing chunks. But at this time, she heard a voice saying, "The visions have started then." So Circe was like, "You did this?" As the voice goes on to say, "That's not exactly how I would put it, but yes. My most devoted disciple, my most beloved of all I have loved." Which at the time had Circe like, if I was beloved, you would never have allowed me to be imprisoned in hell. You would never have allowed me to be brought so low. You would never have forced a child on me that was not my own. But the voice goes on to tell her, there's a great and powerful game afoot, Circe. Each of us with our own roles to play. Each of us with our sacrifices to make. The arc of the universe is long, and it should bend towards justice. But at every chance, it does not. Instead, it dies, smothered in its cradle over and over again. No more. A new path has been set, but many were broken to set it. Some minds, some bodies, some hearts. When I too was asked for what's most sacred to me, I could not blink. I would have given you to this cause no matter what. You are not wrong, but I could also see what it would be. I could see that only one such as you could raise the hero we would need. And I could also see that her love would change you in ways you could not have imagined. When I saw that you would defy me to protect her. Which right there has Circe like, I would never. Only for the voice to tell her, you will, And that is how I know that in this case, what was right for me, for the world, and for Diana, also happened to be right for you. You may look upon me, Circe, most beloved of all my beloveds. Look upon Hecate, and know you are blessed and will be remembered. And so right here, not only does this show us who was talking to Circe this whole time, which I don't think was much of a surprise, because we've seen Circe mention Hecate's name a number of times prior to this. And I've heard the name pronounced a number of ways before, whether it's Hecate, Hecate, or Hecate. Let me know in the comments which one you guys usually go with, because I pulled up some obscure YouTube channels to get an idea of what was the most common, and man, there are some strange videos out there. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. But it's this conversation between Hecate and Circe that shows us how the circumstances and the upbringing of Diana in the absolute universe has been very intentional. And that's aside from everything with absolute power and Darkseid creating a better version of the DC universe, which I almost feel like we need to go back and cover at some point, at least in a way that breaks down how the absolute universe came about. And if you guys want, we can do that once we get caught up. But with what we're being told here about the universe not bending towards justice, and how Hecate had instead set things in order for Diana to be the hero they need, this set Diana on a path that would both mold her character and set her up to be insanely powerful. And much of that goes back to Circe with the way that she raised Diana, the things that she's taught her over the years, and even the weapons that she's made specifically for her. And we're also told here by Circe that this was the night when she started to make plans for Diana's first lasso, built with love and pain, magic, and fire. It would be called Sacrifice. Like Diana's love, it would be transformative, and like my love, it would be a prison. Which, once again, for me, when it comes down to what I love about Absolute Wonder Woman so far, it's how her story could have easily been turned into this whole arc of how she was raised in hell and grew up with resentment, which, if done right, I mean, it's fine. But to me, it's really something special to see a character come out of that without letting it determine who they are. And I feel like we're going to come back to that topic a few times in both Absolute Batman and Absolute Superman. But nonetheless, when we jump back to Diana, after the spell is finished, we see that she has her arm back and her strength is fully restored. Just before she heads out, Etta tells her like, hey, you got a full pint of blood on your face. You might want to wipe that off before you head out there. So Diana does, but before she goes, she lets everyone here know that she's in their debt, and she commends Etta for getting ready to go out there and help people. Because prior to this, Etta used to be a detective, and now she's a private eye, and I imagine that we'll see more of both Etta and Gia down the line. But when Diana goes out to face the tetracide, she sees that at this point it's made its way to the city, bringing it way closer to the civilians who weren't able to evacuate. So now, before Diana is able to do anything, she needs to lure the tetracide back out to the beach, because soon her deafening spell's also gonna wear off. So next, Diana readies her sword for what's to come, which is going to be ridiculous, might I say. But first, to lure the tetracide out to the beach, she ends up doing a spell, where she tells it to be what it craves most. So it ends up letting out the sound of countless people in agonizing pain to lure out the tetracide. And it's insanely loud, because it needs to be. But also Diana points out here that all magic has a price, where in this case the price is her having to hear the exact sound that she would hear if she were to fail. Which in other words is like your own nightmare come alive. So on one hand it's kind of like, man, how do you perform under these conditions? But on the other hand, I guess you could look at it like playing an away game, where you gotta listen to thunder sticks the whole time. Though in this case I imagine it's a much darker version of that. But going back to Diana's sword, now that she's drawn out the tetracide, it's here where she does her spell to get it ready, by making it insanely larger, so she could use it to strike the tetracide and basically one-shot this thing. And I can only imagine what's going through the tetracide's mind, with it looking up like, where the hell did she get that? And I know I played around before calling it the Buster Sword, but I'm gonna tell you right now, this sword, the Athena Blade, it would undoubtedly give Cloud Strife sword envy. Cause Diana just sinks this thing right into the tetracide, and she slices it like a loaf of bread, and you can just see all of its insides. It's wild. And you know, anytime I see a scene like this where some huge monster gets killed and you just got his body laying out in front of the city, because even still this is being televised because the news crew in this universe don't take no days off. But anytime I see this, I think of those movies where the government comes in after and they take pieces of this creature so they can weaponize it. And I almost get that same feeling here, because just after Diana defeats the tetracide, we head over to the White House, and it's here where we see that Veronica Kell is the National Security Advisor in this universe. And now I'm interested in seeing how exactly this is going to play out, because usually we see Kell go against Diana because she believed Wonder Woman was given so much by the gods, while Veronica had to build herself up on her own. And I can only imagine if this Veronica also lost her mother at a young age, while Diana's had so many years of experience with her mother. I wonder if this will bring about any kind of jealousy or ill will towards Diana, because we see here, even though the tetracide is dead, she's telling the president that they still have a very big problem. So yeah, Veronica Kell's gonna be some trouble down the line. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.